Our mission is to provide local craft brewers and distillers with high quality, sustainably farmed, artisan malts that bring truly local character and innovation to our region's craft beverage tradition.
So I'm Josh Oliver. I'm one of the owners of Deer Creek and one of the co-founders. We started the company in 2012, and then we started actually producing commercial malt in October of 2014. So we've been running about 6 months so far. We're the first commercial malt house in Pennsylvania since Prohibition. We use all locally grown grains. So we grow some of that ourselves on the farm here, and then we contract grow a lot of that. We're located in Glen Mills, Pennsylvania, right near Westchester. We converted a 150-year-old barn into a floor malting facility. So it's been a lot of work. It took us about 18 months. We do traditional floor malting, so we have a floor malting space downstairs, cast out the grain on the floor and rake it by hand, like they do kind of in Scotland now. There's not a lot of people out there that do floor malting on a commercial scale.
Hi, my name is Mark Brault. I'm one of the owners here at Deer Creek Malthouse. Also the chief maltster, responsible for end-to-end operations, making sure we take the high-quality barley that we grow here on farm or from the local community and turn it into high-quality malt that we can supply to local brewers and distillers in the area. So we decided to start a malt house in southeast PA for a couple reasons. One, there's a lot of barley that's grown here and other small grains. Two, there's also a lot of really high quality brewers and distillers. And given the gap in the supply of malted barley, we decided it was a good opportunity for us to kind of translate some of the farming that was already happening here into a processing operation to shorten the supply chain and be able to supply brewers and distillers with malt.
I'm Scott Welsh. I handle the agricultural side of the operations for Deer Creek Malthouse. This is a plot of barley that we planted in conjunction with Penn State. They brought their small plot equipment down here and planted it for us. They'll come back and harvest it. We're providing the land for the trial, and we do all the crop care in between planting and harvest. And basically what we have here is a replicated trial where we're trialing close to 70 varieties of barley. Replicated meaning that we have each variety is represented in multiple small plots throughout the trial to give us the ability to do statistics and make sure the results are valid, to see what grows well in our soils, in our climate, as well as what creates a good barley grain, good quality that can be malted well. We have a number of different varieties of malting barley from around the country, as well as some from the UK, United Kingdom. We were cooperating with a group over there that provided some varieties for us to try and see how they grow here in the US. So.
My name is Josh Fryauff. I'm the newest member of the Deer Creek family. I'm a maltster here, and prior to that I worked 15 years as an optical engineer in the telecommunications industry. I've also been a home brewer for about 7 or 8 years, and it's been a really exciting process, a big career change for me, but one that I'm really passionate about and looking forward to carrying on.
We noticed that, being in the beer industry, there wasn't any supply of local malt. It seems like every town has like 2 breweries now, and they use local meats and local cheeses and local produce, and then they buy their malt in Europe or Canada. And we were really surprised. And looking into it, we realized there was no option. There is no local malt in Pennsylvania, so we decided to try to fill that gap, and it's been difficult. One of the big reasons is there's not a lot of commercially grown malting barley in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of barley grown in Pennsylvania for feed, but it's not the right type, it's not the ideal type to make malt and beer out of, and whiskey. So part of the challenge is finding the type of barley that's needed to grow. And then the other part is building this malting infrastructure. So you'll see the malt house, and a lot of the equipment that we have is custom made by us, designed by us. There's not a lot of malt houses out there our size, so you can't just go and buy the equipment. So we have a lot of customers in the small brewing space and even the medium, larger size brewing space. Most of them in the Philadelphia region, a couple out in the Pittsburgh and a little bit broader, but in general, I think that's where the value is Pennsylvania and the Philadelphia region. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Pennsylvania brewers and distillers right now aren't using local malt because there is no local supply. I think everyone in the area really would like to be more sustainable and have a more local source of high quality artisan raw materials to use for some of their brews and spirits. There just isn't that infrastructure. It's that reason for a few different reasons. Prohibition wiped out a lot of the malting infrastructure that was here, and barley has sort of migrated west too, and a lot of the malting operations followed. So most of the large malting operations that exist now are in the Midwest and Great Plains and in Canada.
My background is a chemist. I have a chemistry degree. I worked in specialty chemicals for 15 years or so, coatings, adhesives, inks, that kind of thing. I've been a homebrewer since the late 90s. I started homebrewing in college with a couple friends, and then started doing my own batches. And I've always been kind of a beer geek, and you know, going after kind of sought after beers and trying as much as I could, which really kind of developed into this malting passion. And the fact that there isn't a local option for grains really kind of pushed us towards that direction.
Prior to working here at Deer Creek Malthouse, spent a lot of my career in biotech and pharmaceuticals in a variety of different roles, from scientist to supply chain manager, and was also a home brewer and used a lot of that background in large-scale fermentation operations and analytics to translate to what we're doing here at the Malthouse.
I have a background in agricultural production, farming, as well as a background in business development in agriculture. And so this is a good project to get involved in to help develop new opportunities for agricultural crops in the Mid-Atlantic region.
So malt is a completely natural product. It comes from basically the seeds. Most malt that you have is made out of barley, but you can really make malt from any kind of seed. The only ingredient on a bag of malt is barley, if it's barley malt, or wheat, if it's wheat malt. We don't use any additives or chemicals. It's a very natural product, and also there's no genetically modified barley on the planet. So we take barley from the field and we basically germinate it in a controlled condition, and then we stop the germination by drying it out. And that germination process produces a bunch of plant hormones and enzymes. They're useful for the brewing process, and also changes the chemical nature, the chemical makeup really, of the barley kernel. So it frees a lot of those starches so that they can be accessed by the enzymes that you've produced. And it also starts the growing process. So when it's malting, and you'll see this later, you have the little rootlets that come out of the barley kernel, and you also have the part that would become the green leafy stem, which is called the acrospire, which is growing up on the inside of the kernel. And that's how we kind of generally measure the modification of the malt. And then once we think that it's modified enough, we dry it out with the kiln. So it's a relatively simple, natural process, but like brewing, you know, it's not difficult to make a good beer. If you want to make the same beer, or you want to make a target beer over and over again, there's a lot of science, there's a lot of process involved. Same with malt. It's not difficult to make good malt, but if you want to make the same malt over and over again, or you want to make the malt that you want, there's a lot of details kind of involved. Malt does a lot for beer. So it contributes all of the alcohol, which makes beer what it is. It contributes all of the color. You can boil hops in water for a long time, you're not going to get a lot of color. It also contributes all the sweet flavors, and it contributes a lot of the sweet kind of smells. So the hops are there to balance the sweetness of the malt. The malt gives the yeast fermentable sugars, which change into alcohol, and also the essential amino acids that the yeast need to grow and to convert all those sugars into alcohol. So you can't have beer without malt.
Malting is a 6-step process. Variety selection is the first and most important. The second step is cleaning and sizing. Third step is steeping, then germination, and finally curing and drying the barley. It's really important to control every aspect of that process in order to hit quality specifications that are important for brewers, especially craft. We're spending a lot of time trying to make sure that the incoming barley and our process are suited to be able to hit those criteria for brewers. First step in the malting process is variety selection. Really important part of the process because you can't make good malt with bad barley. There's a lot of varieties out there. Most of them that are being used for malting are on an approved list that the American Malting Barley Association releases. Most of those varieties and the selection of those have been driven by big beer historically. We've been doing a lot of work on our farm around variety selection to screen commercial varieties and experimental varieties to see how well they do here in this region, because most of the malting barley that's grown isn't grown in southeastern Pennsylvania. Very different climate, very different growing conditions, and also the quality requirements that craft brewers are asking for are a little bit different than what's been used to select a lot of the malting barley varieties that are currently being used and are on the AMBA list. Some of the important aspects of malting barley that craft brewers have asked to see are more attention to protein, lower protein levels, in general lower DP, understanding flavor and the origins of flavor, and using flavor as a selection criteria for varieties that would be used for malting. So really important. Again, like I said, you can't make good malt with bad barley, and the storage and handling of that barley is also really important as well. We've got some 2-row barley stored behind me here in this bin. We've actually got some barley and rye and wheat stored in other places on our farm as well, but moisture and pests and rodents are your enemy, so really important to make sure you keep the barley sound and high quality before it goes into your process.
So the cleaning stage of the barley process, or the grain process, is we will take that barley that comes out of the field, the grain that comes out of the field, we'll separate it from the field dockage, the corn, the dirt, the fines, anything that we don't want in the end process. So we'll take it, we'll put it through some sieves in the machine, we'll shake it about, and it will separate the smaller kernels and the rest of the debris that we don't want. Okay, so we use an M2B cleaner. So it uses multi-screen to agitate the grain that's coming in from the hopper, and it will then size it from there. There's a fan that then helps blow out some of the debris and some of the smaller finings and things like that, so that when it reaches the auger on the bottom, we'll get consistent grain. And we want nice plump grains that are consistent, so the water uptake for them is consistent over the course of the germination process.
After cleaning, the next step in the malting process is steeping. The purpose of steeping is to rehydrate all the grain that goes into the steep tank, but also to clean it as well. Really important to start some of the early embryonic events and rehydrate the grain so it can start germination. We steep for around 36 hours, and we use this stainless steel tank behind me. It's actually a recycled and reclaimed piece of steel that we got from a salvage yard in Pennsylvania. We made some modifications to it, and it's just one example of a piece of equipment that we've had to modify and customize to suit our process. Not a lot of places you can go and buy custom small-scale malting equipment, so we've had to be kind of innovative and use some of the resources around us to build equipment to support our process. We actually alternate wet and dry cycles to help facilitate respiration and start the grain germinating at a quick rate. And we'll actually aerate as well to help facilitate some of that early respiration. After the grain's been sufficiently rehydrated, the next step is germination. And here at Deer Creek, we do traditional floor malting, and we'll take the grain out of our steep tank and spread it out on the floor behind me and allow the grain to continue to germinate for another 4 days. It could be shorter, could be longer, depending on the type of grain that we're modifying and some other conditions, but we do traditional floor malting and feel we can really develop some unique flavors by doing it the old-fashioned way. Germination is a really important part of the process. A lot of the biochemical reactions that are happening inside the kernels are really progressing and happening at this stage. Modification is sort of used as a catch-all term for all those biochemical events. Starch degradation, protein degradation, as well as beta-glucan in some of the later steps in germination. And what we're trying to do is really balance some of those changes that are happening in the endosperm that I just mentioned, as well as embryonic growth, because we want to limit respiration and vegetative growth for the embryo and maximize a lot of those changes that are happening in the endosperm to really create the best type of malt that we can that has the most extract and the right composition for brewers to be able to use. As the grain is germinating on the floor, there's a lot of physical changes that happen. You'll actually see rootlets start to grow out of the one end of the kernel, and there's an acrospire actually that grows underneath the husk on the other end of the kernel as well. As the grain is germinating, those rootlets begin to tangle, and there's some heat and moisture that builds up as well. So we will turn the grain on the floor with a shovel or a rake, depending on where we are in the germination process, to help redistribute some of that heat and moisture and prevent matting. We'll measure modification by acrospire growth. It's one of the really basic ways to kind of measure physically the modification changes that are happening inside the kernel by measuring the length of that acrospire as it grows up the inside of the kernel. Right now we've got the window shades open in our germination room to allow a little more light in, but in general ambient light and UV are not good for germinating grain. You want to create an environment where the grain does not know whether it's day or night, so that we can really control germination in just a really controlled way to make the best possible malt we can.
So when the germination is finished, which for us means the modification is about 100%, and all the enzyme package is there that we need, and the proteins are broken down, and we're preserving as much of the carbohydrate that we can, we need to stop that germination process, and that happens in the kiln. So our kiln here is made from a shipping container. It's another example of a custom piece of equipment that we made, because a commercial kiln at our scale isn't really an option for small maltsters like us. So we took this tool for trade, which was probably circled the globe maybe 100 times, and we parked it here as part of our very local business. Hopefully it never moves from here. We've lined it with Pennsylvania hardwood, and we fit the HVAC system kind of around it. So in the kiln we dry with heat and forced air, and the intention and the goal is to preserve the enzymes that are there and needed in the mashing and brewing process, while also developing a lot of color and flavor development. So it's about a 24-hour process, and we start off with the free dry, in which we pump in outside air, we heat it up, we push it through the grain, and then we exhaust it through the top. And then when most of the water is out of the grain, then we do a curing process, which drives off a lot of the DMS precursors and also adds a lot of the nice flavor characteristics of the grain. And in that case, a lot of times what we're doing is recycling the same air to preserve some of the heat. This is a very technical step. So we have 6 temperature sensors in the grain bed. We also have a temperature humidity sensor on the air out. So we can make a lot of decisions about the process based on the data that we get inside the kiln.
The last step in the malting process is cleaning and polishing. So once the grain has been dried and cured, all the rootlets that were growing on the germinating barley have been dried down. You need to remove them because they're very flavor actives. So we do that in a custom piece of equipment. This used to be a corn sheller that we've modified into a debearder or deculmer. The malt goes into the top and gets moved around with a bunch of rods and columns in there to basically create friction to remove those rootlets. And then the rootlet mixture as well as the malt comes out the other end, and then we'll run it through a cleaner to then polish it and separate the rootlets and dust and little bits of broken husk from the malt. When you purchase malt in the store, you buy a bag of malt. It doesn't have those rootlets in there. The rootlets have been removed and they've been separated, like I said, because they're very flavor active. So we debeard and then we clean to polish the malt and give it a nice presentation, so that brewers have a nice quality malt that they can use to make beer with.
We sell malts in 55-pound bags for the most part, which we fill from this completely mechanical bagging scale. So there's no electricity or anything else, it's just a mechanical scale. We also sell in super sacks for some of the larger customers, which fit about 1,000 pounds to 1,200 pounds. This is our Bantlers logo. Clearly, because we're Deer Creek Malthouse, we have these antlers that turn into barley sheaves. So we call them the Bantlers.
So here at Deer Creek, we make a variety of different types of malts. We've got some samples here to share with Steph from Beer Busters. The first malt that we're going to taste is a Colonial Pils. This is made with a two-row barley that was grown locally, and it's very similar to a traditional Pils style. It's slightly higher color, but we follow a similar process. So you're still going to get some of those grassy, sort of earthy notes, but also some sweetness that kind of comes through as well.
Yeah, it's very earthy up front and then bready, and you get that touch of sweetness. It's almost like chewing the beer.
And Independence Pale Ale, so this is our 5L Pale Ale. It's a little higher on the color scale relative to a traditional European style Pale Ale. Has mostly to do with the type of barley and the growing conditions here, but it's going to be a little sweeter, a little less of that grassy, sort of earthy flavors coming through.
Yeah, definitely on the breadier end of the spectrum.
Yeah. Then we've got, this is called our Pennsylvania Dutch malt. So cured at a higher temperature and also stewed a little bit in the kiln. So you get a little more melanoidin formation and you get more sweetness, but you'll also get some higher toasty and roasty, a little bit of caramel notes coming through too.
It's like a pretzel.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite malts that we make. Nice high color too, about 10L. Also have some hard wheat. So this is again grown locally and cured similar to our Independence Pale Ale.
Oh, much smaller.
Yep, different appearance. Doesn't have a husk. So if you're going to brew with wheat, you either need to add some filtering material or make sure it's not a huge proportion of your grain bill, so you don't have any filtration issues.
It's a lot harder too, very tough.
Yeah, this variety. So hard wheat, a lot of people make malted wheat with a softer variety, either white or red, and this hard wheat, it is hard even though it's malted, but it's amazing. You get more like bready aroma and flavor. Even while it was germinating and kilning, it's like a really bready type of wheat, so we think it's a really neat local kind of take on a wheat malt. And last, what we got here, we've got a Pennsylvania rye malt. So again, this is grown locally. This rye was actually grown right down the street. And again, doesn't have a husk, a little different appearance on barley, but going to have a different flavor from wheat. So a little spicy, clean, and a little bit of sort of like those roasted flavors coming through from the curing process. So what'd you think? What are your thoughts? What'd you like the best?
I really like all the malts, but I have to say this Pennsylvania Dutch malt was my favorite.
Nice, yeah, I really like this one too. We've gotten a lot of great feedback. It's kind of unique. So it's called Pennsylvania Dutch, made with our two-row winter barley, but cured in a very different way to create a little more melanoidins up front, so that when we do kind of ramp up the temperature towards the end of the kilning cycle, you get more color development, but also different flavor development too. So it's a higher color malt relative to some of the other samples we tried. It comes in about 10L.
It reminded me a lot of a good German lager and a big soft pretzel. What type of beer would you recommend using this malt with?
Well, it's a really versatile malt. I mean, for a malt that comes in at 10L, it actually has pretty good DP, so it could be used in a lot of single malt recipes. You could use it in Oktoberfest or an alt beer. But really any recipe where you're looking for a little more malty flavor and a little more color.
Speaking of beers, let's drink some beers.
Let's do it.
So guys, welcome to the beer tasting. So obviously we're not a brewery, and we have a fair amount of brewery customers, so we try not to pick favorites, but we tried to get some beers made by commercial brewers with our malt. So we have two that we found that were available, so I got some growlers. The first one is Vault Brewing Company made an alt beer. So this alt beer was made with almost entirely the Dutch malt. It was lagered for a few weeks at Vault. You can see the rich color.
Cheers, guys.
Sounds good.
Cheers.
Thank you. And to finally drinking a beer today.
Yeah.
Ooh, that is
I
good.
get that pretzel flavor.
You do. Then it's like the biscuity. Yeah, like the
really
pretzel
clean.
flavor. Yeah.
Super clean.
The malt is definitely the star. What a great style
Yeah,
for this
they-
beer.
yeah,
We tried to do a malt forward.
Yeah, really good style.
Yeah.
Definitely. Doesn't
Yeah.
taste thin. It's got a nice body to it. Sweetness. Body really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
guys want another beer?
Absolutely.
So this one's from Otto's in State College. He made a PA, so it's a Pennsylvania Pale Ale.
This one's really nice as well. The color's great. I think the primary hop that they used was Summit, so you get that really typical Summit, almost garlic-like hop flavor and aroma that comes through. Really nice.
I haven't tasted this one yet either.
I can smell it from here.
Really?
It is a nice, like you said, almost garlicky, like a spicy quality of the hop.
There's a lot of hop character, but there's also a strong malt backbone, which I'm pleased to taste.
Yep.
So it's mostly the pale ale malt, and then he added some of the Dutch.
Oh, there's a little of the Dutch in here.
A little
too.
bit, I think
okay.
like 10 or 15%. Maybe.
Okay.
So the next one is a homebrew that we made. It's called Scottish Ale. So I made it with 99% pale ale malt and 1% roasted barley. And then it was a 10-gallon batch, so I took like 1 or 2 of the first gallons runoff, and I boiled it down to like a thick syrup and added it back to the boil. So it's got a rich malty character, not low IBUs, but it's definitely malt forward. I find a lot of brewers, I come and talk to them about the malt, and they say, well, what should we make with it? Like they're looking for ideas too.
Right, yeah.
So we're trying to figure out some ideas. We made some nice recipes using some rye, and the Pennsylvania Common, I think, is a good idea that we've been working on.
Yeah, we're trying to do some stuff in-house that showcases our malt specifically. So, I mean, you can hand the spec sheet to someone and say, here's the numbers that we hit, here's all the biological and chemical details of this malt and how it was made. But if you can hand them something substantial and say, here's the potential of what we can provide to you, then I think, some people will like that better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if brewers want to use our malt, they can contact me. It's Josh at deercreekmalt.com. We have a website, deercreekmalt.com. And also we're on social media, Deer Creek Malt. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, those are the main ways. So if you're a home brewer, our exclusive outlet for home brewers is Keystone Homebrew in Bethlehem and Montgomeryville. Also, we have an event on May 30th. We're going to do a tour of the malt house. We're going to do a tour of our trial plots across the street. And we're also going to have kind of a family-friendly area in the parking area with a food truck, some family events. And we have 5 brewers who've made beer with our malt pouring some of their beer. We're selling tickets on Eventbrite. So you can find out some more information by going to our website or by going to Eventbrite.